Welcome to the official broadcast of Life Fellowship Ministries in Kemah, Texas. Our mission is to develop, maintain, and model personal intimacy with Jesus Christ. Be sure to visit us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And now, join us for the Life Fellowship experience.
And just want to say hello and welcome you all again this morning. How's everybody doing? Enjoying this cool weather? It'll be hot before we know it, probably. Maybe later today, I'm not really sure. Let's recite our mission statement. If you'll join me, it is to develop, maintain, and model personal intimacy with Jesus Christ. And that leads to our goal, which is that we become disciples who will impact the world with the love of Jesus Christ. That God wants to make us into these disciples that will live this life out, and that He can work through our hearts and lives. This Christian life is a life of faith, and we sang about it this morning. Nothing is impossible with God, right? And so this life of faith requires of us, though. As we've been learning in this series, Heroes, all the heroes in the faith had to go through some stuff. It wasn't always that easy. And as I look across this room today, I see a lot of God's heroes in here. And so God has a great purpose and plan for you, and He wants to do some amazing things through our lives. But it's going to require a life of faith is seeing the Lord do amazing things in and through our lives. Before I get started, I want to read Hebrews 11:6. This is a familiar passage of Scripture, and it says, it's impossible, say impossible, impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists. That's kind of a duh, right? Anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. So we need to know that He exists, and we need to believe that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. That's what His Word is telling us. So as we seek Him, God pours out His blessings, and it's not just about receiving blessings, but God works through our lives. I was talking to someone this morning, and they were talking about, they had a word from the Lord that they were going to see increase. And the areas of increase were not exactly where they were looking. When we talk about increase, many times we think about what? Our bank account, right? We think about cha-ching, all this money, but what about spiritual growth? What about health and healing and wholeness? What about seeing our loved ones come to the Lord? You know, what about our community around us being impacted? That's increase. As God is working in people's hearts and lives, and chains are being broken over communities and people's hearts and lives, and people are being set free, there's increase in that. So the heroes that we've been talking about have exhibited great faith, great obedience. And the Wednesday night, I want to put in a plug for Wednesday night classes at 7 o'clock. They've been really, really good. Pastor Christine has been teaching on prophecy and different topics. And man, it's really enriching. It's really refilling and refreshing. So if you can join us on Wednesday nights at 7, I know that you'll be blessed by it. So I want to jump in here. Last week, I began talking about Elijah, and there was so much there that I decided to carry it on a second week. So let's look at Elijah part 2. And if you missed last week, I encourage you to go back and check out the message, watch it online. We have Facebook Live, we have a YouTube channel, we have, on the web, we have podcasts, so you have plenty of opportunities there to go and check out the sermon. But so I talked a little bit about the background, what was going on in Israel and Judah at the time. And Ahab becomes king. And let me just pick up kind of where we left off, 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 30. But Ahab, son of Omri, did what was evil in the Lord's sight, even more than any of the kings before him. And he turned away from worshiping God. He built a temple and idols to Baal and pagan gods. And he, what we see continually with Israel is they turned away from God and they begin to worship these other idols. And I think that that's somewhat reflective of what we see in our culture today, that people are turning away from God. And people are not committing their life to Him, and they're not following Him, and they're not growing and allowing Him access into their hearts and lives. And so just to kind of summarize what we talked about last week, Elijah tells King Ahab there would not be any dew or any rain until he said there would be. And it was several years, and that didn't make the king very happy. That wasn't a very positive word for him. And so the Lord tells Elijah to go and hide. And he goes to the brook, and the ravens come and feed him, give him food, meat, and bread. And then the brook dries up, and he sends Elijah to a village, and he tells him to ask this lady for a cup of water and some bread, and she's like, dude, I don't have anything, so you're barking up the wrong tree here. But then we see the miracle provision of God, where as she did what the man of God asked her, that she never ran out of oil or flour until the rains hit. And even part of that account is where her son dies, and Elijah, the Lord raises her son back to life through Elijah's prayers. And then he has a showdown with the 850 pagan prophets and priests. And so that's just kind of a recap from last week. My first point this morning is recognition of our disobedience is one thing, choosing to obey is another. You've probably never done this, but I have. Driving down the freeway, and the speed limit says 70 miles an hour. And I'm doing 76, 78, hoping that I don't get caught. John, don't be lying in church now, come on. But here's the thing. 85, right? Here's the thing. I recognize that the speed limit sign says 70, but I still can choose to disobey. And so we need to come into this place, this relationship. That's why this whole thing about this relationship with the Lord is important, because we need to not only know what to do and obey, but we need to actually obey. And again, it's not about performing. It's about this relationship that we have with Him that drives us to want to follow His commands and follow His lead. And we know that, I'm getting ahead of myself, I think, but obedience follows blessings. So that's my first point. Recognition of our disobedience is one thing. Choosing to obey is another. And that's what we see time and time again with Israel, is they recognized, they knew that they were in disobedience, but still they chose to disobey. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to look at verses 38 through 46. Immediately, and this was when Elijah was having the confrontation with the 850 priests. He says, immediately, the word says, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, the Lord, He is God. Yes, He is Yes, the Lord is God. And if you remember last week we talked about this. He said, listen, if fire comes down and burns up your altar, you guys that are worshiping Baal, then let him be your God. But if it's the Lord that brings the fire down, that burns down this sacrifice, then submit to Him and acknowledge that the Lord is God. The Lord is God, not Baal and not these pagan gods that you worship. And so we know that the fire poured down from heaven and burned up the sacrifice that Elijah was presenting. So they witnessed God's power. But how many times in the past had they witnessed God's power? Coming through the sea and seeing the provision and seeing God do these miraculous things, but yet they chose to turn away. And so I know that there are people today that have seen God's power, and they say, man, I know that God wants a relationship with me, but I'm not interested. There are people that declare that. There are people that live that out. And God is saying, man, I want a relationship with you so that you can live the abundant life that Christ came to give. And again, we're not talking about money. We're not talking about material things. We could be talking about those things because God promises to meet our needs, but it's so much more than that. Let's look at verse 40. Then Elijah commanded, seize all the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape. So the people seized them all, and Elijah took them down to the Kishon Valley and killed them there. He eradicated them. Elijah and the people kill all these false prophets who were supported by Ahab's wife. And that'll come into play a little bit later, probably next week. But Ahab's wife, Jezebel, have you ever heard of her? She supported these these pagan prophets and priests, probably because they would tell her the things that she wanted to know. But she was not following after the Lord, and that's where the children of Israel got into trouble, because they would marry these women that were worshiping pagan gods, and then they would begin to worship their pagan gods and turn away from God, and it would impact not only them but their children, and just goes on down the line. Verse 41, then Elijah said to Ahab, go get something to eat and drink, for I hear a mighty rainstorm coming. Now keep in mind, he's told him there's not going to be any dew or any rain until Elijah tells him that there's going to be rain or dew or water. And so this has been like 3 years. And he says to him, go get something to eat and drink, for I hear a mighty rainstorm coming. I hear a rainstorm coming. But yet we'll find that the rainstorm hasn't come yet. And so he's not talking about the physical. He's talking in the spiritual realm, that he's seeing the rainstorm is coming. God is speaking to him, and he sees that this is about to end. This famine and this drought is about to end. Verse 42, so Ahab went to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and bowed low to the ground and prayed with his face between his knees. Okay, so Ahab, go ahead and go eat. It's all over with. It's going to rain. And then what does he do? He goes and prays. Interesting. Ahab may not have liked Elijah very much, but I think he saw the proof that Elijah was hearing from the Lord due to the consistency and the power of God working through his life. He could not deny that. Verse 43, then he said to his servant, this is Elijah, go and look out toward the sea. The servant went and looked and returned to Elijah and said, I don't see anything. I didn't see anything. Elijah's going, man, I told this guy it's going to rain. I need to go pray some more. Lord God, have you ever been in a situation where you know the Lord is directing you to do something? And you're like, well, God, I know you told me to do this, and it's not happening yet, but I believe you, I trust you. And we're in that situation with this building. We're not sure where we're going to go when we exit here. But we know that God is moving us out, and we don't see it, and we may not feel it, but we believe it because we know that God is leading us. And so what we find here is that Elijah has heard from the Lord. He didn't just make this up, or he didn't just dream this up, but we've been talking a little bit about faith. So Elijah is having to live out this life of faith. Is anybody walking through some faith right now, trusting God? Faith is really about just trusting God, right? It's saying, God, I believe you, and even though I don't see it, even though I don't feel it, even though, it doesn't look like it's happening, I'm going to continue to trust you. Verse 43 continues, 7 times, Elijah tells him to go back and look. How many of you have given up after 1 or 2 times? 3 or 4 times? I think we all have. But when we know that the Lord has spoken to us, we need to persevere, and we need to continue to seek him. So when the Lord gives us a promise or direction, sometimes we just have to keep on pressing through. We need to keep on proclaiming the things that God has told us. And that's why worship is so important. A lot of the songs that we sing, we are proclaiming, God, there's nothing impossible for you. God, you can make a way where there seems to be no way. And so there's something that happens as we worship and we proclaim these things, as we hear ourselves proclaiming, as others hear us proclaiming, as the hosts of heaven hear us proclaiming, as God himself hears us proclaiming, we're making a proclamation here. And what that can do is it can build us up and encourage us. It can encourage one another. So my first point was recognition of our disobedience is one thing, choosing to obey is another. My second point is obedience leads to blessings. As we obey, There's a couple of things with obedience. God realizes that he can trust us. He says, listen, I know that they're going to obey. They're going to follow my commands. They're going to do what I ask them to do. And I'm going to pour out my blessings. I'm going to pour out my Spirit upon them to lead them and guide them. When we look at the heroes of the faith, man, God had, even just with Elijah, he had him do some interesting things. Some things that I wouldn't have had him do. I would have done things a lot different. But God has a purpose and plan. And so we don't always have a roadmap that goes exactly the way that we want to go. But it's about his purpose and plan and leading us according to his plan, because he's got everything mapped out. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense to us. But God is working on our behalf. Obedience is not always easy, and the Lord will walk with us in everything that he's called us to do. And it's going to require us to walk in faith before he'll open the next door sometimes. So if we haven't done the things he's asked us to do already, then what are we waiting on? Let's do the things that he's asked us to do and then wait for the next thing. Last week, the Lord had directed me to do a couple of things, and so I did those things. And I'm like, okay, God, I've obeyed. I've done. Now what's next? What do you want me to do now? And so we need to take that posture where we are always looking to him for guidance and leading and direction, and then we need to obey. All right, verse 44. Finally, the seventh time his servant told him, I saw a little cloud about the size of a man's hand rising from the sea. Then Elijah shouted, hurry to Ahab and tell him, climb into your chariot and go back home. If you don't hurry, the rain will stop you. Now we know that there's this issue that Elijah's had with Ahab. Elijah tells him it's not going to rain, and Ahab is like, oh, you're the troublemaker. And Elijah says, no, I'm not the troublemaker, you are, because you have chosen to disobey and not honor the Lord. And so they don't have a very good relationship. I mean, when Elijah tells Ahab's servant, hey, I'm here to see him, he's like, oh, dude, man, he's been trying to kill you. And I don't even want to tell him that you're here because he might kill me. And so they didn't have a real amicable relationship. But yet what we see here is Elijah says, hey, tell him to hurry, to get home. He's still doing the right thing. He's still trying to, be a blessing to this guy, because if you don't hurry and get home, once it starts raining, it may be like Harvey in Houston. It's going to rain a lot, so you need to get on the road. As soon as the sky was black with clouds, a heavy wind brought a terrific rainstorm, and Ahab left quickly for Jezreel. So Ahab takes off. Ahab's seen the prophecy and the fulfillment of the things that Elijah had told him are going to come true. And now I want to stop here for a second. And where Mount Carmel was on close to the Mediterranean Sea, so it's right here. And then here's the valley. What was it? The Kishon Valley was here, and then Jezreel was here. So it wasn't like it was just right around the corner. Many people think it's probably 17 to 30 miles. So let's just call it 20 miles. So this is where Elijah was. This is the Kishon Valley, and then this is Jezreel where they were going. Verse 46, then the Lord gave special strength to Elijah. God gives physical abilities and strengths. Remember Samson. He had supernatural strength. And I did a little bit of research and came up with some information here. The average speed of a runner is 10 to 13 miles per hour. And the fastest man, I think, recorded on a 100-meter dash is 9.58 seconds, which was 27.8 miles an hour. A horse and chariot can run about 35 miles an hour. So a man typically can't keep up with a horse and a chariot, not for very long, maybe a few feet, right? But let's read on in verse 46. Talking about Elijah, he tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to the entrance of Jezreel. He ran all the way in front of him faster than the chariot. Now, we don't know that the chariot was going 35 miles an hour. Probably not, at least not all the time. But imagine that you're in this chariot and you see somebody coming up behind you and they're outrunning the horse. That would be amazing. I remember a story, some of you may have heard this, but Michael Jr. is a Christian comedian, and he talked about he was jogging one day on this jogging trail, and there was another trail that intersected that trail, and there was an attractive young white woman that came out onto the trail. Michael Jr. is African American. So anyway, he's running along, and she comes out onto the trail in front of him, and she starts speeding up, and so he's kind of looking around, and he's speeding up, and as he speeds up and gets a little closer, she's running faster and faster, and he's like, well, I don't know why she's running, but I'm running too. And next thing you know, he's run past her. He's passing her up. She was running from him, and I guess she was afraid of him, and he's running past her. And so that's what I can envision was happening here. Ahab's in the chariot, and he's riding along, and here comes Elijah, and he's running past him, in front of him, beating him. So Elijah prays for the rain, and the rain comes, and he outran Ahab in his chariot. So my third point is fear is the antithesis of faith. Because now when we talk about walking in faith, what is one of the first things that happens? When God tells you, gives you a word or gives you instruction, and then you don't immediately see it happen, what begins to happen? You begin to have doubt, maybe you begin to have fear, maybe you begin to second guess. And that's why this relationship is so vitally important with Him, because we know, wait, I know that that was your voice speaking to me, Lord, because I know your voice. Your word says that my sheep know my voice, Jesus says. And so a lot of times we can allow fear to extinguish our faith and hinder us because we begin to doubt. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear." It's a spirit. I'll talk more about that next week, but it's a spirit of fear. God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. God has not given us a spirit of cowardice or fear, but of power. And we know that word for power is our favorite word, dunamis, which means supernatural, abundant power. And so God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and soundness of mind. So let's look at 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 6. When Ahab got home, now think about all the things that Ahab has seen through Elijah. He told him it's not going to rain, and then it rains. He has this encounter with these 850 false prophet and priests, and he kills them, and then he gets on his chariot, and Ahab outruns him to the gates. And so when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel, his wife, everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. He probably didn't tell him, hey, you know that new chariot I got, that guy outran me in my new chariot. Probably didn't go that far, but he goes on to say, or what happened in verse 2. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. So she says, "May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you killed them," speaking of the prophets. Wait a minute. She didn't witness this powerful man of God and all the things that he had done. She's just off to the side, and her false prophets were soundly defeated. The gods that she worshiped didn't come through. And what's interesting is, was she the king now? Why is she making this decision? Why is she saying, hey, I'm going to kill you? But let's read on. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Okay, so Elijah, we've just seen God do amazing, miraculous things through his life. And this woman says, I'm going to kill you. And he runs off. And then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. God has just done all these miraculous things through his life. And he runs off and he says, you know what, God, I just want to die. Not only did he run, but he wants to just give up. And so sometimes we can see that when God does amazing things through our lives, we can be worn out, we can get discouraged. Let's read on. He said, I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors who have already died. And again, ministry can be very draining and it can be very demanding. And now he's dealing with this woman, Jezebel, who has a spirit, a demonic spirit upon her that is strong enough to cause Elijah, who has just done all these miraculous things, to run away. Verse 5 says, then he laid down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and laid down again. This is the first account of angel food cake right here. And so God gives him some rest, because he had just gone through all these things. And that's the thing, too, that I recognize from the story, that there are times when we need some rest. And God is more than able to give us rest. And he sends an angel. Hebrews 1:14 says, therefore angels are only servants, spirits sent to care for people who will inherit salvation. Angels are never to be worshipped. They are servants of God. They dispense the things that the Lord calls them to dispense or calls them to do. They do his work. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because I know that sometimes people will get caught up in angels and want to worship angels and things like that. They're servants of God. They're not to be worshipped. Hebrews 13:1-2. Keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. You know, we're not called to worship angels. We're to worship God, but we're also called to love one another as brothers and sisters. So when you look around this room, or when you look at the people in your sphere of influence, are you loving them? Are you connected with brothers and sisters that are authentic in their love for one another? Verse 2 says, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. So you know what? There may have been angels in your midst at some point in time that you've entertained. We don't know. God is working through Elijah to get Israel's attention, to stop worshiping idols and to return to him. And I think today the Lord is calling us to a deeper, more intimate relationship with him. I think he's calling us to a life of faith where we are yielding and submitting our hearts and lives to him, and we are choosing to obey. So my 3 points this morning are: recognition of our disobedience is one thing, choosing to obey is another. Obedience leads to blessings, and fear is the antithesis of faith. If you would stand, let's bless one another with this blessing. If you'll repeat after me. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Sorry. I want to thank you so much for being here today. The prayer team will be over here if you would like prayer. And we have a great opportunity every week to make a difference in the world around us as we go out and live it. Thank you for being here this morning. You're dismissed.
Thank you for tuning into our broadcast. For more information, be sure to find us at our website at www.lifefellowship.me or call us at 832-864-2800. Have a great week, and remember to live it. God bless you.